Thank you, Danila. And so I will start. Oh, this is a big light. So today I will talk about the cross-sectional investigation of affect sharing and self-added distinction in order to understand empathy from a developmental perspective. So empathy is a concept that is very studied in social neuroscience and refers to our ability to understand and share the feeling of another person. That is what has been called an affective sharing component, but at the same time being aware that the other is the source of one's own affective state. And this refers to what is called self-added distinction. So these two elements are both important for having a mature empathic experience. What has been studying social neuroscience mostly is related to affective sharing. So there are plenty of evidence about how our brain processes the emotion of another person. What is less understood is the self-added distinction. It is a more complex phenomenon to capture with behavioral paradigm and in the scanner. So what we did a few years ago is try to develop a paradigm that was able to exactly to study this self-added distinction during empathic judgment. And what we did, we used simultaneous visual tactile stimulation of two participants that they were in the room. And you can see in this small picture, it's a little bit small, that the participants were faced back to back, and the visual tactile stimulation consisted in being presented on the screen of two stimuli, one referring to the self and the other referring to the other person, and the participant being touched with the same material resembling the stimulus on the screen. So let's say that the self was presented with a rose and it was touched with the hand under the curtain, could not see the stimulus, with something that was feeling like a rose. Or with something that was negative. For example, in this picture, it's not easy to recognize, but there are maggots, so like worms, and you have the feeling being touched by something disgusting. So this was able to induce long-lasting, both positive and affective, positive and negative emotion. What we then added to is that the stimulation of the two participants was either congruent or incongruent. And as you can see before, you see the picture before, in this case, both self and other, they have a positive congruent stimulation or a positive negative, congruent negative stimulation. But in this particular condition, the other person was touched by something that was of the opposite valence, either in the negative domain or here in the positive domain. And what we added to it was to try to ask the participant on making an empathic judgment of the other person's affect. So the entire idea that was behind this paradigm is that it's much harder to judge the emotion of another person. So in this case, the other participant is touched by the same negative stimuli, so it's a stink bug, so an insect that it is not really pleasant to be touched by. But in one condition, the participant, the self, is in a congruent state, also in a negative state, or in an incongruent state. So in this case, the participant was touched by something positive. And the idea is that when we judge the emotion of the other person and the other person is in an opposite valence, we are in an opposite valence of the other person, we tend to judge the other person's emotion towards our own affective states. So that's what we call egocentricity bias. And for us, the egocentricity bias is as a measure, an indicator that there is some sort of failure in distinguish our emotion from the one of the other person. So the entire idea was that if first we can capture such a biases, so actually do people make wrong judgment when they are in an incongruent affective state, and how this reflects self-added distinction, if they reflect self-added distinction. This was investigated in several behavioral and functional imaging paradigms. So we first looked, as I said, if we were possible to induce these biases. And as you can see here on the y-axis, this is the emotional rating attribute to the other person. So how pleasant or unpleasant is the stimulation for the person. And with different color, this is the coding of the congruent or incongruent condition. So in the congruent condition, participants were attributing more positive emotion or more negative emotion compared to the incongruent condition, suggesting that they were shifting the emotion of the other person toward their emotional state when they were in the incongruent condition. And this was observable specifically for the empathic judgment, not when they had to judge their own emotional state and was the other person in an incongruent state compared to themselves. This is a calculation of the egocentricity bias, and basically from now on I refer to this as the size of the bias. So in the following slides, the idea is that the highest is the bias, the worse is the ability to distinguish between ourselves and another person. So next we investigated what happened what is without the neurophysiological underpinning of this phenomenon. And what we observe is that during other but not self-judgment, incongruent trials elicit results in a higher activation of right supramarginal gyrus compared to congruent trials. So our question was, so this region is somehow involved in the bias, and what we want to investigate is the causal role of this region. By using repetitive TMS, we could, and interfering with the activity of this area, we could show that indeed, by interfering, the bias increased considerably compared to a control condition with the same type of simulation. So it seems that the right supramarginal gyrus is causally involved in overcoming these biases. How does this region do? So how does it? One possibility that we investigated with the functional connectivity is by talking more to somatosensory and visual visual cortices that are involved in the task. Indeed, what we found is that an increased connectivity between right supramarginal gyrus and both a private, so S1 and S2, so somatosensory area, and more public sensory channel, like visual area. One possible mechanism that we infer is that the right supramarginal gyrus works by a multisensory social integration of information that in incongruent trial somehow needs to be resolved. Next question was, is this bias, this phenomenon stable, or it change over time? So how self-added distinction and the bias that results from it change across time with age? And the hypothesis was started with the evidence is one of I mean, it's quite an old paper now, but suggesting that different brain regions, they show different trajectory depending on where they are. For example, the region that we are interested in, supramarginal gyrus, that belongs in this area, show an inverted U shape with the idea that is developed over time and then decline over age. So as we seem to be convinced from the previous study that supramarginal gyrus is involved on overcoming the bias, we would expect that this would change over age. We investigate this with two studies, one behavioral study involving 114 participants with an age range from 13 to 78 years old, and one fMRI study with 92 participants with a similar age range, so 14 to 76. And to mention one more time, our hypothesis is that with age, the activity of SMG increase when you have to perform the task, so there is a better functionality, and the control also over the bias gets better. So say in other words, with age, the bias tends to have a U shape, being much stronger when you are younger, reducing over the middle age, and then increasing again when you tend to be older. And in the first behavioral study, this is actually what we observe. So as I said before, this is the size of the bias. So the higher is this graph, the bar, the stronger is the bias observed. And we observe that it has a U shape with a strong bias in adolescence, going to more normal values in young adults and middle-aged adults, and going up again in older adults. So confirming the initial hypothesis we had of how the bias would appear across the age group. This is a representation of the same bias with a plot, a scatter plot. Next, then we ask, okay, we found this phenomenal behavior. Let's see what happened on a brain level. Can we also find that this is underpinned by the activity of supramarginal gyrus? So first, we redid the behavioral study in the scanner. So there are some changes in terms of the paradigm, and we focus only on three groups. So we discarded the middle age group because there's a very similar bias to the young adults. So suggested just to reduce the number of participants. But indeed, we could not really replicate the initial behavioral findings. And I can speculate later why we did not replicate them. So there are different possibilities. What we partially replicate is the fact that the old adults, they indeed show the bias, actually quite strong in this case, but it's not observable any difference anymore between the young adults and the adolescents. So in adolescent young adults, we cannot see the bias. We could not see the bias anymore in the scanner. Then we ask ourselves, okay, let's see if the brain is telling us something about how people are processing incongruent and congruent trials. We look first at the structural analysis, just to sanity check to see if he has we could replicate the finding of Sowell. And indeed, we see a linear decrease of cortical thickness and gray matter in several regions of the brain. So this is the overlap of the map on a template. And in particular, when we focus on the right supramarginal gyrus, that is the region we are interested, we see actually a linear decrease of the cortical thickness or the density in this particular region. So this is the age plotted on the x-axis and the density of the structure. But actually is not so far away from what the initial finding of Sowell were presented, in which if we start here, you could also see that somehow resemble the trajectory that they saw. Here is definitely more linear. What was interesting is that we observe a correlation between the density of the right supramarginal gyrus and the size of the EB, with participants with lower density showing the higher biases. Next, we look at the function. Do we see the same phenomenon in the function, a linear decrease in right supramarginal gyrus? And here it comes the actually surprising or less surprising phenomenon. So what we observe is that young adults, they show the right supramarginal gyrus that we expected to see, but this was not observable neither in adolescents or older adults. So it seems that in these two groups, this structure was not functionally active or tracking the emotional egocentricity bias. And this comes because, even if it's not a strong result, the activity in this region seems to show the predicted inverted U-shape. So basically, we have the middle group with a stronger activity, higher activity in this region, but the other two groups that don't show such a stronger activity. And that is also plotted again as a scatter with all the data points. So what is happening here? It seems that first, the adolescents can solve the task now. They can perform the task in the scanner. They have a linear decrease, or they show a linear decrease in a structure, but the functional seems not to follow it. And how is possible that they are actually solving the task if it's not functionally properly this region? So we look at connectivity. And what we observe is that we run a connectivity analysis between the right SMG and the somatosensory cortex, S1 and S2. And here, indeed, we found that the adolescents, they do not differ from the young adults, while the older adults, they do. So the connectivity is preserved in the adolescents, but is not in the older adults, with a linear trajectory, with a decrease of connectivity between the right SMG and these two structures, so somatosensory structure. And this strength of connectivity was significantly correlated with the size of the bias. So the stronger the bias, the lower was the connectivity between SMG and this region. So this seems suggest, of course, there are still could be other reason for that, to be able in certain conditions to overcome such a bias is not fundamental to have activity or SMGene working properly as a region, but actually the entire network should be functional. So the connectivity between the sensory channel that they are actually helping to solve the task should be preserved. So now I conclude. So to conclude, empathy, as I try to convince you, is not only requires a mechanism to share each other's emotion, but also to for keeping them separate. And right supramarginal gyrus seems to play a crucial role on this respect. One possible mechanism is the multisensory integration of self and related information by increasing connectivity with somatosensory and visual area. This self-added distinction seems, so this conclusion seems to be corroborated by age-related changes, both in the neuroanatomy and function that are underpinning the bias. And finally, the data could suggest that preserved connectivity of supramarginal gyrus seems to be sufficient to overcome such egocentric tendency under specific conditions. And I would like to thank Federica Riva, Klaus Lamm, Tanya Singer, Christian Ruff, and Martin Komiker for making this possible, and especially Federica that is here because she had analyzed all this amount of data. Thank you for your attention.